morning, all. As we enter into this service, please note that those of you participating via Zoom have been muted by our host, and we ask that in-house participants please remain masked while in the sanctuary. Thank you, Jeff. Also, be advised that this service is being recorded and with the exception of joys and concerns will be published online. Finally, if you wish to take a moment to arrange your own chalice at home. Religion is one of the most complex and enigmatic of all human institutions. It is an instrument of love and peace on the one hand, and a vehicle for hatred and violence on the other hand, from a study by D.N. Jones and his colleagues. Randy, would you like to light the chalice? Because we practiced it that way. So Randy will light the chalice here in the sanctuary, and I invite you to light your own chalice and place it where it can be seen by all of us. Our different paths come together in this holy place, graced by the history of our free religious heritage. Let us be mindful of the forces deep within which call us to become more than we are. May this hour bring rest and renewal, comfort and challenge. May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but that we are connected in mystery and in wonder to each other, to this community, and to the universe. Before we sing the first hymn, let me remind our remote participants to leave yourselves muted and our in-house participants to remain masked. However, we want you and whoever is with you to sing with Jan as big and loud as you like. Make it a joyous experience. Please stand if you're able and sing the opening hymn, O Light of Life, number 117. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist community of Cambria. We're glad you have joined us today. Our UUCC sanctuary sits on land which the Salinan and Chumash indigenous peoples historically inhabited. We honor their contribution to this region and give thanks for the opportunity to gather as a faith community on their unceded ancestral lands. As a Unitarian Universalist community, we celebrate religious diversity and welcome all who journey in search of faith and spirituality. The UUCC is a lay-led congregation run by the democratic process. We invite speakers from different religious traditions and spiritual or scientific backgrounds to speak at our pulpit. We encourage presentations covering a variety of topics and areas of interest to our community that connect with the UU 7 principles. Today's service centers around the fourth principle. We affirm and promote a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. As responsible religious seekers, we recognize that we are privileged to be free, to have resources to pursue life beyond mere survival, to continually search for truth and meaning, to exist beyond bonds of dogma and oppression, and to wrestle freely with truth and meaning as they evolve. My name is Dolores Miera, and I am your worship associate for this morning's service. I'd like to extend a special welcome to our guests and visitors. Glad you've joined us this morning. If you are not on the mailing list, are you on the mailing list? Yes, okay, good. Please visit the UUCC website at uuccambria.org so that we can keep you informed about all our activities. And please check out what's happening, the weekly e-blast for all members and friends. This is a great way to keep up with the latest news in this community. And a reminder, if you wish to see this or any of the past Zoom services again, recordings of these services can be found on the UUCC website and Facebook as well. Membership Committee invites all non-members to consider joining our community. Please contact Diane DeMarco or a person on the board if you are interested. Thank you. So again, good morning and welcome to everyone. The affirmation is both a recognition of the nature of this community as well as a promise we make and aspire to. Let us now recite the UUCC affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its prayer. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth and freedom, and to help one another. We set aside this time for any short announcements that would be of interest to our UU community members and friends. Please keep the items short and to the point. And for any items that need more explanation, please call or email the person after the service to be respectful of everyone's time. If you have an announcement, please raise your hand when Andy or I call your name. Please stand or unmute yourself and then speak. Jeff, do you have an announcement?
Yes, it's already listed on the website and everywhere else, but yes, I'm giving a talk here next week on Sunday, and I'm very much looking forward to explaining reality with a twist.
I have an announcement. So on Thursday is the Operations Committee meeting at 6 o'clock. Anybody that wants to come, please do. We have a bunch of things to cover, so thank you. Contact me and I'll give you a Zoom link. And Andy.
Right. I don't see any announcements out in our Zoom guests. I'll just remind everybody that we have our weekly meditation circle Thursday mornings at 10 here at the sanctuary. I'll be out of town. Hopefully Diane will be feeling well and can lead that. We should probably check with Diane as Thursday approaches. Thanks.
Okay, so as Jeff said, and some of you may not have heard, he will present next week Reality with a Twist and Other Existential Anomalies. Don't miss it. Sharing together some of our personal and significant joys and concerns brings us closer as a faith community. We invite you to share the milestones that are deeply felt as part of your personal lifelong life, along with expressions of gratitude or acknowledgement. But please be mindful and considerate of all who come to worship with us this morning. This is a time of community building. The collective flames, of these candles embody all the joys and sorrows which may have gone unspoken today, but are also deeply felt in this community. The first reading is an excerpt from Killing for God by Stephen Schwalbe. Of all the various religious schisms that have resulted in significant conflict, none has been more deadly than the Protestant split from the Catholic Church when Martin Luther proposed his 95 theses challenging the legitimacy of the Catholic Church and its Pope in 1517. The schism officially began in 1521 when Roman Emperor Charles V issued the Edict of Worms that condemned Luther and his ideas, that officially banned Roman Catholics from defending or propagating them. The conflict that eventually resolved this long-running schism was known as the 30 Years' War, fought in Central Europe from 1618 to 1648. This war killed over 35% of the entire population of Europe. Martin Luther, an ordained priest and professor of theology at the University of Wittenberg, made his stand against the Catholic Church and its Pope by advocating the Word of God as given in Christian biblical scripture over the theological traditions proposed by various popes. As with other notable reformers, Luther caught the attention of the Catholic Church in Rome and was summoned to Augsburg for a trial on heresy charges. Luther realized he was one man opposed against the mightiest power on earth. The raison d'etre Roman Empire, of the Roman Empire had become to protect the Catholic Church. Though Luther was found guilty, German King Charles V allowed him safe passage home, where he hid from the church authorities in the Würzburg Castle and continued publishing doctrine attacking the Catholic Church. Luther even translated the Bible into German. Eventually, Germany adopted Protestantism, and King Charles V abdicated his throne and went into hiding. Let us join in a time of meditation, of prayer, and of silence. Let us seek the quiet and the calm, laying aside our struggles. And in the silence, may there be a reverence in our hearts, a thankfulness within our spirit, and a deepened understanding of the meaning of our lives. Let us enter the stillness. May we find the compassion and empathy we need to strengthen relationships. May we find ways to love each other well. May we not judge or condemn, but rather build a beloved community. Second reading is an excerpt from Killing for God by Stephen Schwalbe. The conflict between the US and Al-Qaeda began with Osama bin Laden's fatwa, declaration of jihad against Jews and Crusaders, which was published in Al-Quds Al-Arabi in 1998. It accused the US of occupying Muslim lands, plundering Arabia's riches, dictating to Arab rulers, and serving Israel. The jihadist action was as follows: the ruling to kill the Americans and their allies, civilians and military, is an individual duty for every Muslim who can do it in any country in which it is possible to do it. With this guidance, Al-Qaeda militants mounted multiple high-profile terrorist attacks against the US beginning in 1998, to include the August simultaneous bombings of the US embassies in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and Nairobi, Kenya, where over 300 people were killed. In October 2000, Al-Qaeda attacked the USS Cole, a US-guided missile destroyer, while it was refueling in the port of Aden, Yemen, killing 17 US Navy sailors. Then, in October 2002, Al-Qaeda bombers attacked a tourist mall in Bali, Indonesia, killing over 200 people of several nationalities. However, the biggest terrorist attack in the world history occurred on September 11th, 2001, when Al-Qaeda jihadists flew 4 American passenger commercial airlines into the World Trade Center in New York City, the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., and attempted to attack the White House, though passengers overtook the hijackers and crashed the plane into a field in Pennsylvania. Almost 3,000 people were killed as a result of these simultaneous airline attacks. Please stand if you are able and sing This Is My Song, number 159.
This is my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for lands afar and mine. This is my home, the country where my heart is. Here are my hopes, my dreams, my holy shrine. But other hearts in other lands are beating with hopes and dreams as true and high as mine. My country's skies are bluer than the ocean. A sunlight beams on clover leaf and pine. But other lands have sunlight too, and clover, and skies are everywhere as blue as mine. Oh, hear my song, thou God of all the nations, a song of peace for their land and for mine.
Thank you, Jan. Today's sermon is titled Countries and Groups Killing for God, to be delivered by Dr. Stephen Schwalbe. Stephen Schwalbe is an adjunct professor at Columbia College. Formerly, he was a professor at the Air War College and the American Public University. During his 30-year career in the U.S. Air Force, he served as the Assistant Defense Intelligence Officer for the Middle East and Terrorism, Air Attaché to South Korea, Air Attaché to Jordan, and Inspection Director for the Department of Defense, Inspector General. He has written 2 books on conflict and religion, Killing for God and Killing for Religion, and is currently working on a 3rd. His primary claim to fame is being Randy's brother. Steve.
Great. Thank you very much for having me back. It's great to be here. Let me start with,
We see
go.
your slide, Steve. There you go.
Okay. This book was inspired, just recap, it was inspired by when I was teaching at the Air War College, and shortly after 2001, the terrorist attacks. And I realized there was no course on religion and conflict, and I wanted to teach one. And as such, I was trying to find a textbook, and I couldn't. Found instead a gap in the literature. I just wanted to write a book for those servicemen and women who are going overseas and potentially fighting any religious conflict, so they would know what was happening and why it was happening. So there's 3 main chapters in this book, and I already presented concepts of religion, conflict, and man-made religion to the group. And today I'm going to discuss religious polities. A polity is a form or process of government, in this case, religiously oriented. And for me, that would consist of schisms, countries, and terrorist groups, in that order, and in the order of the Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So schisms split within the religion. Normally that's philosophical conservatives and liberals. And that's what we see here in Judaism. The Orthodox sect of Judaism is very conservative and following Jewish tradition closely, where the Reform sect is more liberal, allows for change and pluralism. And the conservatives are like a compromise in between. It's somewhat liberal, but also follows religious tradition. However, the conservatives believe those laws are man-made and not divine, as the Orthodox sect believes. So there's over 15 million Jews in the world. Half are in the United States and about half are in Israel. And as you can see, the Orthodox, the conservative group, and the compromise group consists of about the same percentage in each location. However, the liberal group is very minimal in Israel and dominant in the United States. And because there are so few, there are no real conflicts involving bloodshed between the Jewish sects. Turning to Christianity, Martin Luther was the catalyst that started the Protestant Reformation in Europe. However, he was preceded by John Wycliffe, who was a theology professor at the University of Oxford, and he declared that the friars were taking confessions, were frauds and charging too much, and so led a movement, started a movement. Jan Hus of Czech was a rector of Charles University in Prague, and he led the Bohemian Reformation. He was eventually caught and tried and burned at the stake. As a result of that, we had the Hussite Wars in 1420 to 1431, and in that period, the Catholic Church mounted 5 crusades against them and lost all 5. And then after Luther, he inspired many, to include the Waldenses of France, it was the church declared that Andy Waldens was killed. And in 1655, the Duke of Savoy led a Catholic force and killed 1,700 of them. King Gustav I of Sweden led the Protestant Reformation in Sweden. John Calvin in France preached in Paris on a daily basis to thousands and railing against the Pope and the Catholic Church. And King Henry VIII of England passed a couple of acts shortly after he assumed power and said he was the leader of the Church of England. So the papal reign in Europe ended in 1798 when Napoleon's army invaded Rome and captured and put Pope Pius VI in prison. Now, what's interesting to note here is that every principle of papacy that existed at that time still exists today. And you can see the number of wars that were involved in the Protestant Reformation, equaling over 17 million people killed. Now, turning to the schism within Islam, there was an issue about the mechanism of succeeding the Prophet Muhammad after he died. And despite the numerous times he was asked about that, he refused to elaborate. But he did designate a successor in case he died, Ali Talib, who was his cousin and his son-in-law. However, the Arab tradition was that the ulama, a council of elders, would select the most qualified to be the new leader of the Muslim world, known as the Caliph. However, a minority believed that Prophet Muhammad's blood was divine and it should be a blood lineage, much as we've seen in Europe. So after Prophet Muhammad died, which was rather sudden in 632, the ulama selected not Ali Talib, but instead Abu Bakr, who was one of the closest friends of Prophet Muhammad, to be the first caliph. Well, Ali Talib didn't take this very well, and through a lot of conflicts, eventually ended up couple dozen years later with the Battle of Kamel, and the Shia lost. And then the next year, he went up against the Sunni governor of Syria, and again, the Shia faction lost the war. And then subsequent to that, Ali Talib was assassinated by the Kharijites during his prayer at the Grand Mosque in Karbala. And in the Battle of Karbala, Prophet Muhammad's grandson, Hussein Ali, led a group against the Sunnis. In this case, Yazid I, who is the Caliph of Umayyad Empire, and they were outnumbered and they were slaughtered, and that also resulted in the killing of 72 Hashemites. That's the Hashemites of the clan of Prophet Muhammad, and Hussein ended up being beheaded. So in the world today, Saudi Arabia leads the Sunni faction. However, the Saudi official religion is Wahhabism, adopted in 1932, and it pretty much believes that we should be living as the Prophet did in the 7th century. So it's a very conservative. Iran leads the Shia faction today, and Israel, the only Jewish state in the Middle East, sees Iran as an existential threat, and so has sided with the Sunnis. And now that's one of the reasons we've had the Abraham Accords in 2020, with the peace treaties being negotiated with the guidance of the United States, with the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco. Okay, that's it for the schisms, and now we're turning to the countries. starting with Iran. Big country. Became a theocracy with the overthrow of the Shah in 1779, the Shah being supported by the United States and CIA. And Ayatollah Khomeini took over the country and the Ayatollahs have been in charge ever since. And one of the biggest problems for Israel is that Iran is pursuing a nuclear weapons program, which the United States and Israel has tried to thwart for years, and it looks like they're months away, and it looks like it's going to happen inevitably. Next country is Saudi Arabia. Established in 1932 as a monarchy, and you'll note that only 40% of the population follows Wahhabism. It cut ties with Iran in 2016 when the Saudis executed an Iranian cleric and about 40 other people, and that was very upsetting. And so the protesters attacked the Saudi embassy and ties were cut and have been. The Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman runs the country, even though he's number 2. The king is Salman Al Saud. Mohammed bin Salman has been accused of assassinating dissident journalist Jamal Khashoggi, who works for the Washington Post, and dismembering him. He's an interesting leader, and that's who President Biden is visiting shortly. Next is Israel. Parliamentary democracy, which means there's a prime minister, but it's not a two-party nation, so they have difficulty holding power, and so they're going to have their 5th national election in the last 4 years, if you can imagine. 21% of the country is Arab, and it's problematic because the Arab population is growing much faster than the Jewish population. Israel was authorized by the United Nations and shortly thereafter declared independence, and then immediately after that was involved in a war with 5 Arab countries led by Egypt. Israel won that war and 2 others after that, resulting in the acquisition of a number of areas around Israel. And President Carter negotiated a peace treaty in 1979, which returned the Sinai back to Egypt, and we no longer had major Arab wars against Israel since then. Branching off for a moment about the Palestinian problem. The Palestinians is an ethnic group. It was the people were there in the area of Israel when Israel became a country, and so they were displaced, and they have sought relief from that ever since. So President Clinton brought Ehud Barak, the Prime Minister of Israel, and Chairman Arafat of the Palestinian Authority to Camp David in July for a couple weeks, and they had great progress on 4 of the 5 issues. But when it came to national borders, that's the last thing that was addressed. And basically, take a handful of paint, throw it against the wall, and say, "There's the borders of your country." And Arafat was incensed, and he left promptly. And so nothing further has been accomplished about the Palestinian issue. And that would primarily be because once Arafat died in 2006 from a coma in Paris, the Hamas separated from Fatah, and they had a war in 2007 in which Hamas won and took over the Gaza Strip. And so now there are 2 parts, the Fatah in the West and the Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And instead of one leader, there are no leaders. And so no progress has been made since then. And that's why, one of the main reasons why. Okay, let's turn to Syria. It's a republic headed by President Bashar al-Assad. And he is an Alawite, which is a subset of Shia. And so the Shia consists of less than 20% of Syria. And then the other 60+% is Sunni. So it's just the opposite. The minority rules the country, much like Saddam Hussein in Iraq, where the Sunnis were the minority ruling over the Shia. So we had a civil war started with the Arab Spring, which actually started with a civil war in Tunisia, and it quickly involved many countries, including Syria. And that civil war continues till today, with over 600,000 Syrians having been killed. On a side note, another ethnic group is the Kurds, like the Palestinians, without a country. And as you can see in the lighted areas, they live in areas including Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. During the Operation Iraqi Freedom, the Kurds were significant in helping the United States, and they actually declared Kurdistan independence, which was not recognized by the United States. And during President Trump's administration, President Erdogan of Turkey approached him and said, could you please remove the US forces in the north of Syria? We want to remove the Kurdish threat there, which they considered existential. So Trump did that, and then Turkey invaded over 300-mile stretch, 20 miles into Syria. Let's turn to Afghanistan. Afghanistan has been in a conflict for decades, many decades, and 90% are Sunnis. And the Soviet Union invaded on Christmas in 1980, and Afghanistan defeated them with a lot of help from the United States in 1988. And Sudan gained independence in 1956 and became the largest country in Africa. Very difficult to govern that country with hundreds of ethnic groups, hundreds of language dialects, although the majority of the people, 75%, were Muslim. Eventually the Christians returned to the south and were abused by the government of the north. And so a second civil war began in 1983 between the Muslim north and the Christian south. Eventually South Sudan was able to gain independence, but within a couple years, the deal was there was two ethnic groups, dominant ethnic groups, the Nuers and the Dinka, and the president and the vice president were supposed to switch after 2 years. It didn't switch. That resulted in a civil war that's ongoing now, which is unfortunate. Okay. The analysis here is that the theocratic governments, the religious governments, have a tendency towards conflict. And all the conflicts that we discuss are motivated primarily by religion, except for the Palestinians, Kurds, and South Sudan. The rest are religious. And the Saudis lead the coalition of Sunni nations, and the Iran leads a coalition of Shia nations. There's a lot of proxy wars ongoing between them. Okay. Terrorist groups. Terrorist groups are, I'm only going to cover the prominent ones in the world today, and they use religion to justify their conflict. So starting with, and the other thing is, each of the groups has a male champion, which its members pledge allegiance to even above their religion. So in the case of Judaism, this Meir Kahane founded a number of political groups. All were terrorists and all were banned, including the Terror Against Terror in 1975. Eventually, Meir was killed in New York City in 1990 by an Arab American. And once he died, all the Jewish terrorist threat kind of dissipated. In Christianity, the primary group is Ku Klux Klan, a white supremacist group who was formed shortly after the Civil War focused its attention on the freed Black slaves. And then that again happened, reemerged itself in Georgia. And then the third iteration was as a result of the civil rights movement to give blacks more rights, equal rights in the 50s and the 60s. And as of 2016, there are 30 clan groups in the United States with 8,000 members and growing. And then turning to Islam, where we have most of the current terrorist groups ongoing in the world today. Starting with the Muslim Brotherhood, the first one formed by Hassan al-Banna. And the Muslim Brotherhood preaches hatred against Jews and the destruction of Israel, as all of the subsequent terrorist groups do. And when he called for the overthrow of King Farouk, Farouk then banned the Muslim Brotherhood in 1948. And eventually, Muslim Brotherhood is a social organization, primarily, not just a terrorist group. I mean, they have schools, they have charities, they do hospitals and businesses wherever they exist. So it's helping out the poor of all these Arab and Muslim countries. But in 2011, it actually became legal in Egypt. And in 2012, Brotherhood, Brother Mohammed Morsi was elected president, but that didn't last long because there was a military coup, and El-Sisi arrested Morsi, put him in prison, where he subsequently died. So Muslim Brotherhood still exists today in over 70 countries, from the Middle East to Africa to Southeast Asia, and even in Europe. Hezbollah, that means the party of God, exists in Lebanon as a result of the Israeli incursion to remove the Palestine Authority from Beirut. Subsequent to that attack, this Hezbollah was formed officially and supported by Iran, and has been paying for Israel ever since. However, it's not just a military terrorist group, it's also a political group, and once 13 seats out of 128 in the parliament in Lebanon. And it has over 30,000 fighters and 120,000 missiles provided by Iran. So it's actually more powerful than the Lebanese Ministry of Defense. Here it's official locations. And then there's Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda means base or foundation. It's a militant Sunni terrorist group, and Osama bin Laden founded it and wanted to capitalize the momentum they had after defeating the Soviet Union. And Osama, unfortunately, fortunately was killed by the SEALs in 2011, replaced by him in al-Zawahiri. It considers the Shia and Sufis and other non-Sunni groups in Islam to be heretics. And the concept of takfirism means that you can kill fellow Muslims. So this is one of the things that's prominent within Al-Qaeda. And it's also an umbrella organization worldwide, has franchises all over the world that report and get financed by Al-Qaeda, to include Afghanistan, Pakistan, the Arabian Peninsula, and the Maghreb in Africa. And it also is pursuing weapons of mass destruction, and is still considered one of the top terrorist threats in the world today. And there's countries where Al-Qaeda has franchise represented or present. Okay, Islamic State, a jihadist movement by Abu Zarqawi, and that was just before I got there in 2000. Osama felt that Zarqawi is too extremist, so they eventually had splitting differences, and they split in 2006. And subsequently, Abu Bakr took over and declared Islamic State as a nation and a worldwide caliphate. And there it is. The Islamic State at its height was bigger than the United Kingdom and had over 10 million people, and its capital is Mosul. But 4 years later, with the help of the United States and Syria and Iraq, it had lost all its territories. However, it still operates out of 18 countries and competes directly with Al-Qaeda for recruits and resources. Hamas, that means the Islamic Resistant Movement, founded by Ahmed Yassin, was a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. As I told you, it fought with the Fatah faction of the Palestinian Authority and took over the Gaza Strip in 2007. There's a map of the West Bank and where how it fits into the region with Egypt and Israel. And you'll see in the bottom of the map, there's the Yasser Arafat International Airport. Now, before I get into that, as it says, newer attempts to unify Fatah and Hamas under the Palestinian Liberation Organization or Palestinian Authority umbrella have failed. And they're no closer to being united than ever. And it has 25,000 munitions, lots of rockets. And you wonder about that airport. Wonder no longer. That's what it looks like today. Taliban. Taliban means students. They were prominent in defeating the Soviet Union in the Afghan war, and their leader was Muhammad Omar, who was a Mujahideen commander, and they held power for 5 years, and they were brutal. And then we left last year, and they re-implemented all their current former policies, and they're brutal again. They're having a problem maintaining and operating the country. That's not one of their expertise. Boko Haram means in Arabic, Western education is forbidden. It's a Sunni jihadist terrorist group in the Lake Chad region. They're primarily in Nigeria. And in 2009, they led a massive uprising in Nigeria, killing hundreds of thousands, displacing 2 million and causing $9 billion of damage. They possess a lot of captured material from the Nigerian military. They have control over 15,000 square kilometers in the northeast of the country. Al-Shabaab, that's the party of the youth. They get funded by Al-Qaeda. They're primarily operating in Somalia, think Black Hawk Down. They're taking targets in Somalia and countries around Somalia and the UN mission that's there. And here's a map to show what they control and where they've been active. This was the leader of this group is Ahmed Omar today. So the analysis here is that when terrorist groups often form in reaction to liberal tendencies, and Judaism, it's a reaction to the Palestinians, Christianity, it's a reaction to pluralism since the Civil War in Islam against the presence of foreign presence in Muslim countries. Okay. Conclusions. As societies modernize, there would likely be continued religious resistance. There's a strong correlation between theocratic countries and terrorism, as I mentioned. Until modernization, until the modern era, religion and government were inseparable. That meant that religion without war and war without religion was inconceivable. Religion is still a viable threat to peace today. There is nothing divine about conflict and killing. As a footnote, I have actually published a second book, as you can see there, Killing for Religion, where I focus on religion and conflict in the major religions of Hinduism in India, Buddhism in Southeast Asia, and Shinto in Japan. And while there are many people out there, including editors at Lexington Books, who believe that Buddhism is a peaceful and passive religion and hence rejected publishing this book, the whole purpose of the book was to show that that's not the case. So I compare both, and I also compare Asian and Abrahamic religions and conflict within both of those religions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. I can see why you call your book Killing for God. Whoa, okay. This morning's offering will now be given and received. Please remember, we are a self-sustaining congregation and provide all financial resources for our many ministries. We recognize the spiritual value of generosity and invite you to participate. If you are viewing this service remotely, please use one of the methods shown on the screen. Thank you. Our thanks for all gifts given and received for the work of this community. Let us now sing the doxology.
From all that dwell below the skies, let faith and hope with love arise. Let beauty, truth, and good be sung through every land by every tongue.
Please stand if you are able and sing the closing hymn, Gonna Lay Down My Sword and Shield, number 162.
Gonna lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. Gonna lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside. Gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war shake hands around the world, everywhere I roam, everywhere I roam, everywhere I roam. Gonna shake hands around the world, everywhere I roam. Gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more.
Thank you, Jan. Let's now recite the valediction. The flame of this chalice will no longer burn today, but the light of the flame within our hearts continues to shine brightly, illuminating the love felt in our community. Please extinguish your chalice at home now. After the benediction, we encourage you to stay for questions and comments. Andy or I will call on you when you raise your hand. Steve.
Thank you. Given that religions are more likely to be created by man, inspired by the Holy Spirit, the Unitarian Universal Church is to be commended. Its search for spiritual growth and truth and meaning instead of adhering to one religion or almighty being is highly noteworthy. Seeking inspiration from a wide variety of beliefs was my motivation to do religious research. The more research I do, the more I realize how much of the divine is within each of us, and that we should celebrate that. Conflict should not be part of any religious belief, and I discovered that this usually happens when religion is aligned with politics, either a government or a person. Let us reflect on both the historic shortcomings of humankind as well as its inherent good and future potential. Pursue the positive today and tomorrow.